Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Sorry about the chuckling, it's just you caught us being really childish. There's a countdown that Kieran and I do Thunderbird style, and we said it a bit too loud there, so you may have heard that. It's tickled old Kieran. So once you start chuckling, Kieran, how are you?
I'm good, provided we don't have to talk about football. Yesterday's match was so bad that I actually, in the middle of the second half, watching Fulham attack after attack after attack, I went on to Company's house at Craven Cottage and downloaded Montrose's accounts and summarised them on social media. That's me fighting against the man, Kevin. That's me taking on the system.
It's always easy to tell when you're watching a match you're not enjoying, because suddenly your social media start literally, oh look, it's two pigeons. Oh, how are Montrose doing then? Well, now you've raised it.
Well, what we're finding is that an awful lot of clubs in Scottish football are making small losses. They're not as big as those that we're seeing south of the border, but as we've always said, it doesn't matter how big the loss is. You need somebody or somehow to fund it. So it's not great, but that's reflective of the tough conditions I think all football's operating in at present.
It's questions day, Kieran, but we're bookending the questions with two news stories, one of which is much funnier than the other, I have to say. So we're going to save that till last. The first one, Kieran, I want to talk about this as a news story, not just because John Textor is the co-owner of Crystal Palace, but because he has a huge investment in Premier League football. And he's been giving his forthright opinions, Kieran, on the money behind the Premier League this week, although it's difficult to hear a lot of what he said over the sound of toys being thrown out of his pram. But I don't know how you would tell me. I mean, he wants a World Super League for one thing, and the other thing is he thinks the Premier League is going to wither and die because of a lack of competition.
Yes. I don't think he'd used a mind map to structure his comments. So he was one of the guest speakers at the Financial Times Business of Football conference, which has a lot of high flyers there, and I will turn up one year. They mean, to be fair, I was offered a ticket because I was teaching in Belgium this week. It sort of messed it around time wise. So there were two broad issues that Textor came up with. The first of which, and this is something which in my view, why hasn't he done his homework before buying into the Premier League? Because if you do that, you do your due diligence, just like you make any major acquisition, he would have found out that there are cost control measures. He would have found out that there are limits to how much an individual can put into a club. And also, given that the fact he was buying 40% of Crystal Palace, he would have known that he would have had to get all of the other directors or all the other owners to put in equal amounts if he wanted to provide additional funding for the club. And therefore, there would have to be some form of discussion. So all of this appears to have come as a complete surprise to him. And he now finds out that the Premier League is dominated by the richer clubs, which, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to get there. His argument, and there is merit to this, there's no doubt about this, is that if you've got somebody like Mr. Marinakis at Nottingham Forest, who's a billionaire who spends his time chasing referees up the tunnel, as he did yesterday, which there's things you can do in Greek football that don't necessarily go down, particularly in English football. That if he's a billionaire and he wants to put money into the club to make it more competitive, to allow it to become a disruptor in exactly the same way that Roman Abramovich did with Chelsea, in exactly the same way that Sheikh Mansour has done with Manchester City, then why can't he? And the reason why he can't is that the Premier League over a decade ago introduced these cost control rules. Now, there's no reason why the Premier League, and somebody said to me, well, it's a bit like Brexit, people vote for things and you can't keep going on about it. Well, the difference between the Premier League cost control rules and Brexit is Brexit is probably a once in a generational vote, whereas there are a dozen opportunities a year for executives of Premier League clubs to change the rules. And they've chosen not to do so every time that an opportunity has arisen. It's also ignoring the fact that we don't live in isolation when it comes to football. And even if the Premier League relaxed the rules, there would still be issues with regards to compliance with UEFA rules. But that seems to have gone over his head as well. So I absolutely agree that under the present regime, but also under the proposed changes to the regime, what this will do is it will make the trapdoor more difficult to open. It will mean that for a small club like Palace, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, because Brighton are a small club as well. We all know where we are. The chances to genuinely make a challenge to win a Premier League are zero, or as close to zero as to make no difference. And that's depressing in a way, from the perspective of a football romantic such as we are. And people will refer to Leicester City. There won't be another Leicester City. The rules were changed immediately after Leicester City in terms of monetary distribution to prevent that from happening. And that part of football is really, it's really sad to live with. The Premier League is more competitive than Spanish football, than German football, than French football, and than Italian football, in the sense that you do have, let's be honest, 5 clubs probably. Again, this is having a dig at Spurs, but they've not won anything since 1962 in terms of the title, and therefore, that compares to 2 in Scotland, that compares to 2.5 in Italy, to probably 1 1.25 in Germany, and so on. So it is more competitive, and that's part of the reason for the success of the Premier League. Is it simply a case of, you and I as Palace and Brighton fans, we just have to suck it up? Brighton had the temerity to get 6th last year. They got into Europe. It's difficult to play Sunday, Thursday football, as Burnley found when they achieved it, when they got into Europe, when Wolves found it, exactly the same. And this season, we're seeing it in terms of our results, which are starting to drop off, as you would expect them to do. The demands are that good, and you can't have a squad that big. So I found his comments logical, but I don't know why he's making them, because he's saying nothing which anybody who's been observing the state of football finances hasn't been saying for the last decade anymore. With regards to his comments in relation to the World Super League, I think this is very much a case of be careful what you wish for. Because if you do have a World Super League, by the time you factor in the additional travel, the size of the competition, and so on, the only way that could be achieved would be with a Premier League of probably 16 teams, probably a maximum of 18, which isn't good for Crystal Palace or Brighton. No. Let's look at it from a self-interest point of view. And even if we are in it, all of a sudden, if we go to a 16-team Premier League, is my life going to be enhanced by having 8 fewer Premier League games to watch? Is yours? Is that, or a Villa fan, or the clubs who aren't in this competition? You very much become the sideshow bobs of the show. And again, that will increase the differential between rich and poor. So I just don't see the logic. If you talk to a Manchester United fan or a Manchester City fan or a Liverpool fan and say, what's the big games each season? It's, for Liverpool, it's Manchester United and City. For Manchester City, it's the Manchester Derby match. This is the match that matters. Not Botafogo, not Al Hilal, not Grampus 8. So, or is that a case of you and I being legacy fans who feel that we're more important than the armchair fans who still support the clubs from different geographical markets? Liverpool announced in their accounts this week that they've opened 7 new mega stores in the Asian market, and I'm going, well, yeah, that's an incredible achievement, but it's got nothing to do with L4, where the club is based. It's simply Liverpool, as far as FSG are concerned, are a money-making vehicle, and Asia's a huge market for them, so therefore they open stores there. But it's not football as we know it, and I think we like to think of ourselves as being part of that because we create the atmosphere at matches. But I don't think the owners care.
Well, one owner cares, Kieran, as you pointed out. I don't blame Nottingham Forest's owner for trying to chase the referee up the tunnel yesterday. He was absolutely right to try and chase the referee up the tunnel, but it was a rather short-lived chase, the referee being a fully professional athlete and the owner of Nottingham Forest, shall we say, not being a fully professional athlete and possibly at one stage having to turn himself sideways to actually get into the tunnel. God love him, but he was absolutely right to be furious. The reason the two things that Textor said in particular, where he said if the Premier League doesn't become more like the NFL and gets to a situation where a different club is able to win it every season, then eventually the broadcasting money will have to decline. And secondly, Palace fans would have more respect for him if we thought he was taking up the cudgels on our behalf rather than more on the behalf of Leon, because he also made a big fuss about the fact that he's head of a multi-club model, although we don't like to think of ourselves as being part of his multi-club model because he doesn't own all of Palace. But he basically said it's not fair for any other multi-club model when the Man City model is owned by a sovereign state. Because essentially he said if the American government were to buy Sheffield United, they would win the Premier League within 3 years. So he's essentially saying, like you say, what we've all said, football's not fair. But that was the one that struck me as the most, not petulant, but that's the one that struck me as the most, it's not fair. I've got these clubs and Manchester City are richer than I am because they're owned by a country.
Yes. If we go to a situation in which one club wins the Premier League for 10 consecutive years, I think that will have an impact. And people will say, well, hold on, Manchester City have won the Premier League, was it 5 seasons out of the last 6? I've got to be honest, in 2 or 3 of those years, it has gone to the wire.
Yeah.
And it has been a genuinely exciting end to the season. And therefore, that's not so much an issue. What is an issue is where a league is sewn up in February. And that will have an impact upon viewing figures. But the TV companies, let's be honest, the TV companies don't want another Leicester because I've seen the viewing figures for every season.
Yeah.
I've got it on a spreadsheet. And the lowest viewing figures in any season in the last decade was 2015-16 when Leicester City won the Premier League.
Yeah. Wow.
And as much as you and I as neutrals were absolutely delighted that happened, it did restore our faith in the sense that I can remember Derby County, Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa, Everton, Blackburn. I can tell you who won the old First Division every season in the 70s and 80s, but I can't remember it over the last decade or so because you do become detached because of the dominance of money at the top. And also, I absolutely agree with you in terms of his comments. He was talking about what's best for John Textor, certainly not what's best for Crystal Palace. And I don't see how a World Super League is good news for you at Selhurst, because then the pressure will be on to have a right. We need to scrap the League Cup. For all the clubs that are in the Super League don't compete in that competition, which devalues that competition. Although you could then say, well, actually, Palace have got a bigger chance of winning it, and so on. I get that, but the pressure will be on then to say Liverpool don't want to play Palace or Bournemouth or Brighton on a Saturday. So what's the best way of getting rid of that issue? It's getting rid of the clubs effectively making, and then it'll be let's make it 2 up, 2 down instead of 3 up, 3 down, and so on.
Our first question, Kieran, comes from John Gannon. I don't know when John Gannon sent this question in, but it has become strangely topical. And I think it's a very interesting one, Kieran, given that we're talking about the NFL, which doesn't have relegation. And John Gannon has quite a crafty idea for the EFL here. John Gannon says, given the Premier League's seemingly unchallengeable position on solidarity payments, is it time for a rethink by the EFL? As you've pointed out on numerous occasions, the jeopardy of relegation seems to be a key plank in the Premier League's attractiveness. If in the absence of a greater offer of PL money, the EFL threatened to ban Premier League clubs coming down, suddenly the Premier League is left with a host of end-of-season dead rubbers. EFL clubs would, of course, be unable to go up. That is a flaw in the plan, Kieran. But given the increasingly unsustainable losses being racked up in the Championship in pursuit of promotion, would that be such a bad thing? If the end result is a smoothing off of the financial cliff between the Premier League and the EFL, surely the whole of the pyramid is better off. What I find interesting about this, Kieran, is that we have said on numerous occasions in this seemingly unending row between the Premier League and the EFL that the EFL have no bargaining position. Essentially, the Premier League hold all the cards. But John Gannon, it seems to me now, has given them some sort of bargaining position.
Yes, I think to a certain extent it also involves punching yourself in the face as part of taking on the opposition, because I absolutely agree that the gap between the Premier League and the Championship is too big. It needs to be addressed in some way. But with regards to solidarity payments, and for people unfamiliar, solidarity payments is a proportion of the Premier League's TV monies, which is then given to the EFL to decide how it's going to distribute between its 72 members. And it is the single biggest contributor to the EFL. It's worth around about £4.5 to £5 million for a club in the Championship, and around about £450,000 to £500,000 for a club which is in League Two, which is actually about twice the amount of money which comes from the EFL's own TV deal. So that means that you're probably going to deny yourself that money, because if the EFL say to the Premier League, right, we're not going to allow your clubs into our division, the Premier League says, right, we'll turn off the taps. And you're then also going to be left in this horrible situation. It's going to be a bit like the last lifeboat out the Titanic, because if that's going to take place in 25, 26, the almighty scramble to avoid relegation from the Premier League that season, and the almighty fight to get into the Premier League from the Championship, is going to be for something like we've never seen before. Because effectively, you then create the NFL with no up, no down, no promotion, no relegation. What happens if you're on the wrong side of the divide and you're effectively condemning yourself? Not condemning yourself, because I've got friends who are Leeds fans. I've got friends who are Leicester fans. They're having a great time, having been relegated last season. Their sides are ripping up that division. They're going to away matches. You're going with expectation rather than fear. So I understand where he's coming from, but it's a bit like you've got a jack high and you're playing poker with somebody and you're going all in, and they've already got 3 queens showing in their hand. And I think that's the downside, that the Premier League has got so much power that the only way I think that you can have an equitable outcome of all of this is if the Premier League is forced to do it. And I do actually have a lot of sympathy for Richard Masters, because what we have now seen, and it's a bit like, we're not political, it's a bit like Rishi Sunak trying to control the Conservative Party. There are so many factions within it that trying to present a united front is impossible. And when you try to discipline some of the people who are going AWOL and some of the people who are coming out with some pretty horrendous stuff, that you've got no credibility with them because they just ignore you.
Mm. Get you with your poker analogies. It's like talking to Victoria Coren. I don't know, it goes right over my head. Our next question, everybody, comes from Jack Deth. And I need you to bear with for the first part of the question, because it has nothing to do with the actual question, but I think it needs reading out, just so those of you at home listening to this who think your social circumstances are slightly odd, you're not. You're fine. You're perfectly normal. Jack says, I've been meaning to ask a question for a few weeks, but only got around to doing so while listening to a recent episode. As I was about to hit the send button, Kevin read out my name as he asked a question I sent out months ago that I'd forgotten about. This is one of the spookiest things that's happened to me in my life. Sadly, I couldn't share this moment with my wife, as I was supposed to be working while she looks after our toddler, and she wouldn't be best pleased if I was emailing a football finance podcast instead. So there you go, Kieran, just a little insight there into the home life of Jack Deth. And also just a note, by the way, for any other fathers of toddlers here, because there's only fathers of toddlers who use this phrase, do not use the word babysitting about looking after your own child. You'll discover that that's a terrible mistake.
Yes.
Anyway, says Jack, here's the actual question. Earlier this year, my club Ipswich Town purchased a plot of land behind Portman Road, which used to be a branch of Staples, various other shops, and a car park. Our CEO, Mark Ashton, said that the club had purchased the land as it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do so. He's spoken about redeveloping the stadium recently, but the land is behind one of our modern stands, so it seems to be unlikely that it will be used for that purpose. Could the club change the land into retail units, such as a box park-style bar, cinema, bowling alley or coffee shop, etc., and then use the profits for signing and wages for the playing staff? Would this breach FFP? So when we get to the question, Kieran, it's actually quite an interesting one. And also we've seen Accrington this week having issues with their club that they've built within the stand, haven't we?
Yes. So if we look at the first item, I've been through the EFL handbook, and it says that the PSR calculations are based on club profits. So if the club was to buy a plot of land and effectively say this is part of hospitality, you include the boxes. Is this a glorified box? If you have something similar to a box park, I think you could put forward an argument that it is. We know that some clubs, Bolton Wanderers had a hotel, Chelsea have hotel facilities, Milton Keynes Dons have hotel facilities. I know Brighton were planning to have a hotel at the Amex as well. So this is a way of diversifying your income streams. Whether it will be profitable or not, because if you talk to people in the hotel trade, they go, well, there's quite a few of us closing down at present. And we know from our friends in the price of music that there's many musical venues. So if you have a nightclub there, is that going to work? It comes with that risk. And then you get that awkward situation is start of the season, we've got the hotel needs another £250,000, and you've got the manager or the coach saying, we need to upgrade the facilities of the training ground. Somebody has to make those awkward decisions. So you're absolutely right that Jack, that there's the potential for development. It's not a simple solution to the fact that football clubs are losing money on a day-to-day basis, but again, we've said time and time again, football is a really silly industry in the sense that it's revenue generating for 25 to 30 days of the year, and it's got a wage bill and it's got overheads for 365. And very, very few other businesses are in that situation. With regards to Accrington Stanley, we're very fond of Andy, and he's very hacked off with, I think it's Hyndburn Council, who are making it awkward for the club to hold events at Coley's Bar and the facilities there. And we went there, and I've got this. I'd never been to Accrington before. I don't think you had. No. And I was absolutely gobsmacked. We did a gig there a couple of years ago. Andy was a fantastic person to interview, but I just felt this is great. This is surely the way forwards. And I was just gutted I couldn't get to the Shawaddy Waddy gig that was taking place 3 or 4 days later, because I would have been there, like a shot. So, and the local council were saying, oh, yeah, there's been a few grumbles and we're not going to give you a license. But if you've got individual organisations which are contributing towards the local economy, and yes, you have to take into consideration that the people that live nearby, but I don't think Under the Moon of Love at 10:30 at night is going to ruin my life.
I think we should specify some of Shawadi Wadi, Kieran, I believe. It wasn't. It was the bass player from Shawadi Wadi plus various 19-year-olds. Jake Farr has our next question. Jake says, as amortisation spreads the cost of a transfer over the duration of the player's contract for accounting purposes, why do so many of the big clubs pay for their transfers in instalments anyway? Presumably they have the cash in reserve to pay in full up front, and the selling team would probably prefer it and could even give them a reduced price. I can understand cash flow issues at smaller clubs may require this, but I'm struggling to see the benefit for a team like Newcastle spreading the payments over multiple years. So why do they do it?
Well, if we take a look at, for example, Wolverhampton Wanderers, Wolves announced their accounts in the last 48 hours. And in 22-23, they spent over £200 million during the season signing new players. Now, you could argue that Fosun, who are their owners, do have the resources to give them a cheque for £200 million. But from Wolves' point of view, that means that you're giving one of your competitors, or a few of your competitors, £200 million cash, which they can then go and utilise in the transfer market. If you say, I'm going to spread that money over 5 seasons, the clubs in receipt have only got £40 million of cash, which hampers them as far as their ability to go out into the transfer market is concerned. So there is sort of a bit of chess taking place here. You're absolutely right, Jake, that you can get a discount if you offer to pay all up front. And that used to be Mike Ashley's approach at Newcastle. Newcastle used to have very low outstanding payments in respect of transfer deals. So you could get a £35 million player for £30 million and so on. So there's that. Then they're sort of looking at it from the point of view of clubs thinking, well, if I've got £200 million sitting in my bank account and that's earning interest at, say, 2.5% a year, well, that's £5 million in interest. If I give that to buying clubs, that's interest which is not being earned by me, which is not going into my PSR calculations. It also means that the club in receipt, they're going to be more likely to be overdrawn. They're going to be paying interest on their overdraft, which is going to reduce their PSR position. So again, you look at it, from a commercial point of view, from a compliance with the cost control rules, as well as cash flow. Even for a big club who's got decent owners who are willing to put money, finding £200 million in your bank account at any one point in time is going to be tricky.
Ben Archer has our next question, Kieran, and it's an interesting one for me. It's a concept I wasn't aware of, I have to say. But Ben Archer says, I've noticed in recent years a trend towards prospective owners of clubs providing interim funding in lieu of purchasing the club, and then the current owners of the club pulling out. We've seen it happen with Derby, Birmingham, and now Yeovil Town, to name a few. Is there any legal recourse for the prospective buyers who have provided funds in good faith and then had their fingers burned? Or is this a case of let the buyer beware?
Yes, so I mean this is a commercial contractual issue. So I spoke to a commercial lawyer, and we both know what the answer is. It is, of course, it depends. If you are effectively what you're doing, you're effectively paying a deposit in respect of buying the club. And therefore, you would expect that to be either knocked off the price or the final cash you pay, or it could be converted into shares, or it could be an ongoing cost for when the new owners come in, and that's fine. We've seen this at present, and we've seen, I think, the potential downside of this at present as well.
Coming in or going out, Finley?
Going out with the Baroness has got her Nespresso machine going, and
Okay.
he every time she does a Nespresso coffee, he gets a biscuit. So he's got this Pavlovian reaction to the what's the name of the guy that does the advert? The guy that used to be in ER.
George Clooney.
George Clooney. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Who's got the Pavlovian reaction to George Clooney? The Baroness or Finley?
Well, the Baroness has got a Pavlovian reaction to George Clooney every time he comes on television.
I'm always pleased to hear that a dog has a Pavlovian reaction. It always seems to be quite pertinent. Anyway.
So back to where we are. 777 have lent Everton £170 million, or at least, and they are a prospective owner. If the Premier League rejects them, do they get their fingers burnt? Well, potentially they do. But again, it depends upon the circumstances of the loan. Now, from what we're hearing, I think from fairly reliable sources, is that Everton have borrowed money effectively on mortgage terms, i.e. that means that the lending is secured against the assets of the club, and the money from 777 is way down the list of priorities in terms of who gets paid and when. We do see some owners or prospective owners coming in and say, look, we know you can't meet this month's wage bill, is $500,000 to help you pay it. And then the deals collapse, and then things can turn very nasty, especially if the money was given in good faith, and it all gets messy and has to go through some sort of legal redress, which is money leaking out of the game.
Is there a possibility then, Kieran, that a club that's in trouble could deliberately seek a prospective buyer, get some money off them, and then deliberately say, sorry, we're not selling the club anymore? I mean, you'd only be able to get away with it once, but could you use that as a policy?
Do we have unscrupulous owners in the world of football?
Okay, let's move on.
That is. Yes, you still owe the money to the lender.
Yeah.
It's then a case of you have to go through due legal process to recover it, and some people play a game. I know some of the local lads who are professional tradesmen. They're painters, they're chippies, and so on. And they from what they tell me, it's actually the rich people who are the worst. If I've got a decorator in and he says, it's 800 quid, Kieran, you get 800 quid. That's it. If it's somebody, for want of a better ways, posh, they will not pay, and they'll make life awkward, and because this is the way that they operate. And then, what do you do as that local tradesperson? Because that means you're spending time. B, it's bad for your cash flow. If you go to a solicitor, it's going to cost you money, and it's still going to take time. So it's a risk with anybody that's doing work in modern society, and it does appear that those this is completely inappropriate sort of stereotyping it. Those with the most money are the meanest when it comes to dealing with people who are on a different financial plane to them.
The richest, poshest producer I've ever worked for, and I'm very fond of him. I count him as a close friend. He was knighted recently, and he's probably independently wealthy. Works for the royal family as well on his off days. Is the slowest person to pay, and he still pays by cheque because he thinks it's the gentlemanly thing to do. And the reason is he's never had a mortgage in his life. He doesn't understand freelance cash flow because it's never been an issue for him from the day he was born with a great big silver spoon in his mouth. So the more you say to him, listen, mate, I really could do with that money, the more he goes, well, I don't, why? And you say, because I need to pay the, and he's his bank card's only got a £50 limit. And
good grief.
Because he does. I took him on a bus recently. He'd never been on one. He was the most exciting man. We sat at the front at the top, and he pretended he's like, oh my God, it's like, Jesus Christ, he's lovely, really nice fella, but just doesn't get it. Peter McLeod has another. They're all good questions this week, I have to say. Peter McLeod says, when a team wins promotion via the playoffs, they do so with an extra home fixture and a trip to Wembley. I'm wondering if the financial gain of these extra games is enough to overtake the earnings of teams automatically promoted. So essentially, can a third to seventh place team earn more than a first or second place finish?
Yes, they certainly can. And part of the reason for that, there is no prize money given in the EFL for winning the Championship, League One, League Two, but you've still got, ideally, the Civic Parade. You've still got that fantastic sensation of seeing, as a fan, your captain holding that trophy and all of the joy that goes along with it. But when it comes to the playoffs, the way that the money is distributed, you deduct the costs of hosting the game. 50% of the money goes into effectively a central EFL pool, and the other 50% is split between the two clubs. And that's also the same as when it comes to the final. So it does mean, let's say we've got two big clubs. It could be Leeds versus West Brom. It could be Southampton versus Sunderland or something like that in the playoffs. Those matches are going to sell out, and that's going to be 70 or 80,000 people turning up for those two matches. It's then going to sell out at Wembley. So we are talking sizable amounts. So from a financial point of view, you do get that leg up. The downside is it means there's an extra 2 or 3 weeks before you are promoted. So that's an extra 2 or 3 weeks before you can start your recruitment, because you don't know whether you're in League One or the Championship or the Premier League or whatever it's going to be. So from an operational perspective, it's actually it's a very big negative going up through the playoff route. From a financial perspective, there is a benefit. There has been a sort of handshake sort of agreement historically for those clubs who have been promoted from the Championship to the Premier League to the losing team, where the winners quite often have said, look, we're going up, we're getting £100 million from the Premier League. We'll agree beforehand that whoever loses takes all of the receipts, which I think is one of the nicest things that exists in football. It's an acknowledgement. And both sides would crawl over broken glass to get to that winning position, but the acknowledgement that the gap is so big that we'll give you a little bit of a hand as well.
Yeah, the other problem with going up through the playoffs, especially from the Championship, is quite often, as you saw with Luton, you have to spend a lot of money on upgrading your facilities, your floodlights, your broadcasting facilities, and that gives you 3 weeks less time to do so. So you run the risk of maybe having to play your first 3 or 4 games away from home while you get the stadium ready.
Yeah. So operationally, win it or finish second, and also, I mean, you've had the enjoyment of going up through the playoffs. It's still emotionally pretty horrendous for those 3 matches.
It's only enjoyable when the final whistle goes at Wembley. The rest of it, I'd enjoy it far more if I was already promoted and I was watching the playoffs. To be perfectly honest, being involved in them is a nightmare. Richard Kemp has a similar question. It's such a complimentary question, I have to say, Kieran. I suspect that for once, producer Guy might have thought to himself, this is a good question for Peter McLeod. I'm sure I've got a similar question at the bottom of the sack somewhere. And he's been rummaging through... Oh, that's a terrible image, isn't it? Producer Guy rummaging through his sack. Richard Kemp says, as a West Ham fan, I often wondered about the financial impacts the Europa Conference League had on our club last season. It's often believed, as you mentioned earlier, Kieran, that Thursday night matches have a negative effect on the team for the Premier League Sunday fixtures. As West Ham won the Europa Conference League, how did the prize money of that cup run equate to Premier League position money, i.e. how many league positions was it worth?
Right. If we go to the UEFA annual financial report, of which I suspect one of us has a copy.
I was going to
and
say
one of us might not.
That's a very big we. You say that.
Yes. What you will find is that West Ham United, the prize money for winning it was €22 million. So that's around about £19 million. If you then take a look at the Premier League, each position in the Premier League is worth 3.1 million sterling. So it's 6 places. It's the difference between 9th and 15th. It's the difference, and so on. But that's looking at it on a gross basis. What you also have to do is then to take a broader economic analysis of the Europa Conference. And what we have there is that you're going to need a bigger squad. You're going to need a more expensive squad, a bigger squad to cope with the additional demands of Sunday, Thursday, Sunday, Thursday, Sunday, Thursday. So that gets knocked off. You will have some extra gate receipts. In the case of West Ham selling out a 60,000 stadium, that they priced accordingly, so the prices were not too high, but they were significant. So you got additional gate receipts. At the same time, you then look at the negative. The players will get additional appearance fees, and they will be getting win bonuses, so they will be getting a slice. I was talking to an executive of one club, and he says, for the Europa League, we probably don't break even unless we get quarterfinals, perhaps semi-finals, or probably. So you've got to make an awful lot of progress in that competition before you actually see any sort of net benefit. But of course, we must always remember, I'm going to Rome this week. I'm not thinking about the monetary side of things. This could be very probably going to be our one and only trip to Europe, and from a fan's point of view, and what's the greatest thing about football? What's the greatest thing about if you reflect upon your life? It's all about relationships. It's all about memories. It's creating memories that will last a lifetime, that should be the focus. This is a finance show. I absolutely get that. It's a secondary issue. The West Ham fans who saw the club win that trophy last season, they've got lifetime memories. The club probably made a few million, but it's not going to be more than that on a net basis.
I'm glad you made that little speech there, Kieran, because I was going to say, if, God forbid, Brighton were to win the Europa League, and you have mentioned that you're going to Rome on occasion this week, and have various discussions. But if Brighton were to win the Europa League, you'd rather have that than finishing 9th rather than 11th, wouldn't you? You want something in the trophy.
Oh, yeah.
Of course you do. I mean, I'm desperate for Palace to win. We've got the Kent Cup. It needs company. That poor little Kent Cup standing in that huge... Seriously, people allergic to silver could sleep in our trophy cabinet with no problems whatsoever. We need something in there. So you take that, wouldn't you? If you said to any Palace fans, you want Carabao Cup or 10th, it's Carabao Cup, please. Chris Payne has our last question before we get on to the big good news story of the week. Chris Payne says, and who knew Yeovil would get mentioned again this week? Chris Payne says, I'm a long-suffering Yeovil fan, but my question relates to a former player of ours. Ollie Bassett made his debut for us in 2015, but then never really progressed with us at the time in the EFL. Since then, he's taken an alternative career path, playing in New Zealand, Australia, and now Canada for Atletico Ottawa. My question is, how would his earnings in these leagues compare to an EFL squad player? It seems like this might be a good way for reasonably talented young footballers to see the world.
Yes. Atletico Ottawa.
It's great.
It's a great name for a football club. I'm going to have to look up their shirt as well. I'm very tempted. There's significant differences between the three countries that Ollie has mentioned here. The A-League in Australia, and you and I are, again, we're old enough to remember our mum and dad doing the pools during the off season, and it would be Australian football, and we'd have no idea. No idea of which division they were in, so it made the doing the pools an even more of a ludicrous event than it was historically. But the A-League is probably the most high profile of those, and the average salary there is around about £100,000 a year. If we contrast that with New Zealand and Canada, the most high profile Canadian football team is Vancouver Whitecaps, and they play in MLS. So the Canadian league is a step down. And from the figures that I've picked up, you're probably looking at an annual salary of probably 30 to 35 grand a year there. It's not a terrible salary. You're not going to be able to retire at the age of 33 or 34 having done that. Whereas we know that some people in the Premier League and La Liga can, if they so choose. So those are, I would imagine, quite similar to what you're getting in the National League here. Perhaps what you'd probably be getting if you're playing in for some of the clubs in the Scottish Premiership. Because I've just been going through, there's a lot of Scottish clubs who've been publishing their finances recently, including Montrose. Montrose won't be paying that level of wage because they're a bit further down. So it's a career. It's the opportunity to experience different cultures as well. I'd love to have worked in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. It sounds great.
We end, Kieran, with a bit of good news. Everton fans, Nottingham Forest fans may think that they have their problems in this area. But Pontypridd United, Kieran, we have some news about their 135-point deduction.
Yes, this refers to playing an illegible player called James Sadler. And originally, it went to a tribunal, and Pontypridd were given, I know you can pronounce this a lot better than I can, were given a 6-point deduction plus 135 points suspended and a transfer ban. Now, subsequent to that, they've learnt how to count in the Welsh FA. James Sadler originally was being accused of appearing in 12 games for which he was ineligible. That has been increased to 13. So Pontypridd have been given an additional actual points deduction of 3 points. But the good news is that David Phillips Casey, who was effectively the person who was connected to this, has decided that he has misinterpreted the Welsh Football Association's Rule 14.1, and he's reduced the suspended points deduction from 135 to just 75. So that's a sick. Can you imagine? What other weeks have you been 60 points better off? It's fantastic news. Ish.
Theoretically,
sort of.
Yes. It's
theoretically.
We shouldn't lie. Unfortunately for Pontypridd fans, it is love just because of the sheer number of points involved. But the fact that this KC has admitted that he misinterpreted, I mean, it's almost like the referee at the Forest game yesterday. It's almost a relief when someone makes a basic human error, in a sense, and it's just because you think, well, we're not entirely automated, but it just annoys me that Casey has just casually said, "Oh yeah, I got their figures wrong, old chap. Sorry about that. I misread it." It's well, you shouldn't have misread it, basically. And hopefully, if he was paid any money, that needs to be deducted as well, doesn't it?
Well, perhaps 75 135ths of it should be.
Yeah. Well, I'd say we could ask one of our KC friends, but we know what the answer will be, wouldn't it? It's yes. Very much depends, old chap, doesn't it? Because that's how all lawyers talk. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that'd be very kind of you, and that will get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes, and you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And you can also go to the same website, priceoffootball.com, to buy our book. We shall be back on Thursday with our news pod. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, it's like slightly different farewell today, in the sense that I've been watching Brighton for an awfully long time, and I've been going to matches home and away with my very dear friend Julie for over 40 years. And she was so excited about the prospect of going to Rome. And 2 weeks ago, she was diagnosed with cancer of the spine.
Oh, no.
And she's now having to live in a brace. And she can't go to Rome.
Oh.
And I said that football is all about, it's about relationships, it's about memories. And she gets far more excited about the football than I do. And I was messaging her yesterday from Fulham, and she never misses a match. And make the most of every match that you attend. And yes, you can bitch about the players and you can bitch about the manager, but actually it's about the people who you go to the football with. And, all my love's going to you, Jules. You know how much we're going to miss you on Thursday, but we will be rooting for you and fight the good fight, sweetheart.
Well, obviously, I don't know Julie, but of course I endorse that. That's a horrible news for all of you. And now I'm in a terrible situation of wanting Brighton to win. That's what. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.